In the summer of 1914, Europe went to war expecting a repeat of 1870. Rapid advances in the open, cavalry exploiting breakthroughs, a campaign over by Christmas. For a few weeks, it seemed to unfold exactly that way. German armies crossed Belgium into France and reached within 20 to 25 miles of Paris. The French counterattacked on the Marne. The British shifted from one line to the next, and the front rolled hundreds of miles. Then, within months, something no one had truly imagined appeared. A wound, roughly 470 miles long, ran from the North Sea to Switzerland. Trenches, bunkers, belts of wire. The same pattern spread south on the Italian front, along the Isonzo, on the Carso, in the Alps, and in another theater altogether across the beaches and ridges of the Gallipoli Peninsula. On these fronts, more than 10 million soldiers would be counted as dead, wounded, or missing. Generals and politicians kept promising a decisive breakthrough on the Somme, at Verdun, at Gallipoli, on the Isonzo. The cause was not simply bad generals. Why did the first modern war become a war of trenches? In 1914, no European army planned to fight a trench war. Strategy books still spoke the language of the 19th century. The Schlieffen Plan and Plan 17 envisioned great offensives in the open, cavalry to exploit ruptures, and artillery following close behind the infantry. In the opening weeks, it worked that way. The front surged hundreds of miles to the Marne. Then, in September, the Germans were stopped and fell back north behind the Aisne. There, on the chalk heights between Soissons and Reims, the new phenomenon exploded. Under the fire of French and British guns, German units dug continuous trenches into the soft slopes to avoid being massacred. British and French infantry, advancing in the open and being cut down, learned quickly and began to do the same. It wasn't the result of a grand plan. Privates, junior officers, and engineers, under rifle and machine gun fire, threw themselves down and dug deeper and deeper into the ground. It sprang from survival instinct and battlefield decisions taken on the spot. In the months that followed, the so-called race to the sea, French, British, and Germans tried to outflank one another ever farther north. Each failed attempt added yet another stretch of ditches, wire, and firing positions. By the end of 1914, there was, from Switzerland to the North Sea, a nearly continuous belt of fortified lines. Only then did headquarters grasp that trenches were not a temporary accident, but a new form of war. Between 1870 and 1914, military technology raced far ahead of doctrine. Artillery became quick firing, hurled high-explosive shells on curved trajectories, and could strike targets hidden behind ridges and embankments at about 4 to 5 miles. In the Great War, more than 70% of casualties would be caused by artillery. Infantry no longer carried muzzle loaders, but modern bolt-action rifles, able to fire 10 to 15 rounds a minute with good accuracy at about 220 to 330 yards. The machine gun, derived from Maxim's system, changed the equation. Hundreds of rounds a minute from trained crews in prepared positions. A single gun could halt an entire battalion trying to cross open ground. On top of this, armies added barbed wire. Born as a civilian invention for fencing pasture, it was cheap, quick to lay, and hard to clear under fire. From the start of the war, belts of entanglements were spread before the trenches, several yards deep, sometimes dozens of yards deep at key points. The result was an integrated system. Wire slowed and channeled attackers. Machine guns struck them while halted or packed in gaps. Artillery finished the work on clusters and supply routes. Open terrain, the stage for corps-level maneuvers throughout the 19th century, became a killing ground where every yard taken demanded an exorbitant price. In such a context, the defense held a structural edge. To capture 100 yards, the attacker spent lives and shells vastly out of proportion to what the defender needed to hold them. Digging, fortifying, and staying underground ceased to be a stopgap. It was often the only way to live long enough to go on fighting.
Did you know that most people who watch our documentaries aren't subscribed yet? If you enjoy animated maps and history, join our community. Leave a like and subscribe so you never miss the next episodes.
A trench line was never a mere ditch. It was a defensive system layered in depth, often stretching about 2/3 of a mile from front to rear. At the very edge sat the firing trenches, with observation posts and sentry bays, sometimes barely 50 yards from the enemy. 2 to 4/10 of a mile behind ran support lines with small reserves, ammunition stacks, ration dumps, dressing posts, and shelters. Farther still lay reserve trenches, rally points, and assembly areas for counterattacks, all linked by communication trenches cut in zigzags to break direct fire. In front of the firing line stood belts of barbed wire, about 15 to 100 feet deep. Their purpose was not simply to stop an assault, but to channel it into predictable lanes already marked on range cards. Machine gun crews covered those gaps with overlapping arcs. Pre-registered artillery could engage any crossing within minutes. Roughly 1.25 to 3 miles behind the front, gun lines waited by roads and light rail spurs. Ranges and angles were pre-noted on maps. A single telephone call could bring a box carriage down on crossroads, bridges, embankments, and likely assembly points. Once the SOS signal went up, batteries shifted from standby to full fire almost automatically. Finally came the backbone of the system: transport. Field railways, horse columns, and motor trucks shuttled men and shells along screened routes. The layout was elastic. Even if the enemy seized a village or drove a salient a mile or two deep, reserves could be rushed in and a new stop line thrown across the breach. That is why the Western Front, from Flanders to Champagne, formed a continuous belt of fortified ground, adapted to local terrain, yet unified by the same logic of depth, wiring, and fire control. Everywhere. Everyone tried to smash the trench system in 1915. No one succeeded. In the spring, the French struck in Artois and Champagne. Days of artillery preparation along narrow fronts. Tens of thousands of shells poured into 1st and 2nd German lines. At Neuve-Chapelle in March, the British massed fire on a sector about 1.25 miles wide, and in the opening minutes, broke through locally. But communications lagged. Orders came late, and the guns could not shift fast enough. Infantry lost touch with the barrage, and open ground fell back under German machine gun control. Counterfire pinned the attackers, and the initiative ebbed away. In April at Ypres, the Germans released chlorine on a broad front, the first real gas attack in the West. A green wall drove Allied units from their positions, yet reserves and counterattacks closed the gap before a decision could be forced. In late September, at Loos, it was the British who opened their own cylinders along roughly 6 miles of front. Shifting winds pushed the cloud into English trenches, sowing confusion. Once again, early gains failed to carry to the second line. The year taught harsh lessons. Artillery could wreck wire and parapets, but only if fire kept pace with the infantry. Forward observers, reliable telephones, and planned rolling barrages were still in their infancy. Reserves stood too far back, roads clogged. Staffs struggled to coordinate attacks beyond the first objective. Where the ground was taken, exhausted units faced fresh German counterattack launched from sheltered reserve trenches. By December, villages like Neuve-Chapelle or Souchez had changed hands, but the Western Front had barely moved. The costs were terrible. The gains countered in orchards, crossroads, and a few contours on the map. Proof that brute force, without new methods, could not break the trench. Between 1915 and 1917, almost every device we associate with modern battle appeared on the Western Front. Chemical agents, flamethrowers, tanks, new gunnery methods, and stormtroop tactics. Each promised a key to the stalemate. None alone could shatter a defense built up from wire, trenches, machine guns, and well-served artillery. Gas terrified and killed. Chlorine and phosphine burned lungs. Later, mustard-drenched ground, blinded men, and contaminated dugouts. Yet gas was a fickle ally. Clouds rode the wind, which spilled into hollows or drifted back over friendly lines. Shell-fired gas improved delivery, but by the time the reserves arrived, the gas's worst effect had often ebbed. Masks and training reduced casualties while doing little to open a clean roadway through the defense. Flamethrowers, introduced in significant numbers by Germany from 1915, were brutal at close range. Assault teams with projectors cleared saps, cellars, and strong points, driving defenders into the open where rifles and bombs finished the job. But crews had to close within 10 or 20 feet, carrying heavy fuel tanks and hoses under fire. It was a specialist weapon measured in yards, not a tool for ripping open miles of front. In 1916, Britain deployed tanks. The first Mark I machines could crush wire and cross craters, yet they were slow, fragile, and scarce. On the Somme, fewer than 50 reached the start line. Many broke down. Where they arrived, they smashed nests that had checked infantry for weeks, but they lacked the numbers, speed, and reliability to exploit success. Still, a seed had been planted. Armored weight combined with gunnery and infantry would one day restore operational movement. Artillery adapted fastest. The creeping barrage, planned to roll forward about 50 to 100 yards every few minutes, kept heads down until the last moment if infantry clung to its edge. Sound ranging and flash spotting found hostile batteries. Counter-battery fired suppressed guns that had cut down every advance. Yet if the barrage outran foot soldiers or drifted in smoke and dust, the screen dissolved and the defense revived. Germany refined infiltration doctrine. Stoßtruppen, trained to bypass strong points and nose through weak seams, pushed grenades and automatic weapons into command posts, artillery parks, and signal or telephone posts in the rear. Their aim was not to occupy every trench, but to unravel the system from within, forcing a line to collapse by sabotage. Aviation multiplied the reach of arms. Photographs mapped trenchworks and wire. Wireless observers corrected barges. Bombers struck railheads and bridges. Air power could not take ground, but it made surprise, rare, and coordination possible. Combined, these tools shaved the defender's advantage without erasing it. The trench endured because the defense was a system, and systems demand more than a single new weapon to fall. By late 1917, the balance that had frozen the Western Front began to crack. Russia's collapse freed divisions for the West, briefly stiffening German lines. The entry of the United States brought manpower, materiel, and credit Berlin could not match. In the spring of 1918, Germany gambled on victory before American strength matured. Short bombardments, gas, and large-scale infiltration opened gaps. Railways hurled reserves forward. For the first time since 1914, the front moved fast, about 6 to 9 miles in a single day. Yet the spearheads outran supply, flanks thinned, and no fresh reserves remained to turn gains into a decisive victory. From July, the Allies seized the initiative. Better gunnery, reliable tanks, and air forces working with infantry produced the 100 Days, a rolling series of blows that collapsed the German position. Trenches no longer ruled the field. The defense had lost the systemic edge it held since 1915. Elsewhere, dynamics differed. In the east, distance allowed withdrawals of hundreds of miles. A continuous wall like France's never formed. On the Italian front, years of mountain stasis ended with only Caporetto and then Vittorio Veneto, when morale, logistics, and maneuver finally aligned. The lesson was stark. Trench warfare arose from a particular balance between firepower, mobility, and supply. When that balance shifted through armor, aircraft, trucks, and doctrine, war began to move again. Verdun and the Somme, Gallipoli and the Isonzo were chapters of one story. Armies hurled forward against systems built to stop them and paid for every yard. If this overview helped you understand how trenches shaped the First World War, stay with us. Subscribe, leave a like, and ring the bell so you won't miss the next episode on tactics, weapons, and how the Great War shaped the century that followed. And share this video with a friend who loves military history.